red glow over Kaupang remained visible behind them till the rising sun swallowed it. There was a strong breeze, and Wiglaf gave the order to ship oars and run out the sail. Like a hound let off the leash to hunt, the sea-eagle leapt forward and cast up glittering arcs of water as it cut through the waves. Gunnar stood by the gunwale in the bows of the ship, relishing the fresh air, the cool spray in his face, the tang of salt. He looked at the prow beside him, the upwardly curving post carved into the likeness of a great eagle. "I'm sorry, Gunnar," Thorkel was saying. "I just don't believe it. Perhaps seeing your father killed did something to your mind. That can happen." "You're right," said Rorik, "but I've been thinking about this old man he says he met. Doesn't the boy's description of him sound oddly familiar to you?" Thorkel nodded and shrugged. "Maybe Odin is sometimes described like that in the old stories, but it still doesn't prove what the boy says. Somebody might have put the idea into his head. He might have even dreamed the whole thing." Odin, thought Gunnar. Could it be true? Was it Odin who had helped set him on the road to Valhalla? Who had slipped him a knife so he could save his own life and Rorik's? Gunnar had prayed to Odin for help, and he had known there was something strange about the old man from the moment he had met him. Thorkel and Rorik were still talking, but Gunnar had stopped listening. He reached into the pocket of his leggings and pulled out the feather the old man, Odin, had left for him. He had nearly lost it several times, and it was bent and bedraggled, its spine broken. Odin had told him he would fly with the eagle to the land of ice and fire, and here he was, on a ship called the Sea Eagle. Was the feather just a symbol of that, or did it mean something more? He caught a movement in the air from the corner of his eye. A pair of gulls hovered above the waves just beside the Sea Eagle, almost near enough for him to reach out and touch. They squawked at him, and he remembered the noisy crows at the god's house and the magpies on the roof of Hogni's smithy. "Thorkel, in the old stories does Odin have a pair of birds?" he said. "Yes, Hugin and Munin. The names mean thought and memory. They're ravens, though sometimes they take other forms. Why do you ask?" Gunnar nodded at the gulls. "I'm sure Odin is keeping an eye on me," he said. Thorkel gave the birds a surprised look, but then Wiglaf appeared. "We need to talk, Thorkel," he said. "What about?" sighed Thorkel. "I owed you a favour, and you wanted me to sneak you and your friends out of Kaupang," said Wiglaf with a shrug. "Well, I've done that, but I swear, the sooner I'm rid of you, the happier I'll be. I'll put you ashore in Gokstad." "That's not far enough," said Thorkel. "It's only a dive from Kaupang." "Tough luck," said Wiglaf. "This time, my mind's made up." "Well, maybe we could make you change it," Rorik said softly. He towered over Wiglaf and stared down at him, his face stony. Wiglaf didn't flinch. "You could try," he said. "You're a big man and you look like you can fight. I know Thorkel can be handy in a scrap too, but you don't have any weapons and there's only 2 of you, not counting the slave boy, obviously." 3 of Wiglaf's men were close behind him, swords unsheathed. Beyond them, Gunnar saw the rest of the crew standing by their benches, swords on their hips or spears in easy reach, their eyes fixed on the group in the bows. "Now, let's just try and keep things calm," said Thorkel, his hand on Rorik's forearm. "We're all friends here, so I'm sure we can work this out." Gunnar could see Wiglaf wasn't convinced, even when Thorkel reached into his tunic and pulled out a purse that chinked with gold and silver. Suddenly, Gunnar felt a surge of anger flooding through him. Here he was yet again, with strangers deciding his future. He would tell them where he wanted to go. "You will take me to the land of ice and fire, Wiglaf," he said, stepping forward and looking him in the eye. "I will go nowhere else. Do you hear?" "Shut your mouth," said Wiglaf. "I don't take orders from a slave." "I apologise for him, Wiglaf," Thorkel was saying. "He doesn't—" Then he stopped talking, his eyes wide, for the feather in Gunnar's hand had begun to glow with a strange light. Gunnar wasn't surprised. Deep down he had known all along there was more magic to come. He even knew what to do. He pressed the feather against the prow and watched it merge into the wood. There was a brief moment of stillness. Then real feathers appeared as the carving came to life. Soon the eagle was rolling its great head and stretching its wings, almost as if it were trying to get the wooden stiffness out of its body. Finally it turned, whipping round to screech at Wiglaf and his crew. Wiglaf recoiled, crashing into the men behind him. The rest of the crew were equally startled. Some ran for the stern, others dived behind the benches. A few retreated with swords raised or spears held out. Thorkel had backed off too. Only Rorik didn't move. He shook his head in wonderment. "I'm impressed, Gunnar," he said. "That's quite a trick." Wiglaf slowly stood up. The eagle studied him, its great head cocked to one side, as if it were trying to work out whether he might be good to eat. "We've voyaged on every sea and seen strange things in many lands," muttered Wiglaf, "but we've never seen anything like this. You a sorcerer, boy?" "Perhaps I am," said Gunnar. "Or perhaps I'm just a boy who needs to fulfil an oath he swore. Now, will you take me to the land of ice and fire?" "If it's Iceland, you mean," Wiglaf said cautiously. "We will need to go west, and we're supposed to be heading east, back to the Baltic." The eagle screeched more loudly this time. Wiglaf ducked behind a bench. "All right," he yelled. "I'll take you wherever you like. What else do you want?" "Since you ask," said Rorik, "you can take his thrall ring off." Gunnar turned to stare at his master, and the big man returned his gaze. Neither of them spoke. "Fine," said Wiglaf, "but first he must turn that thing back into a prow." Gunnar looked at the eagle, unsure what to do. He thought for a moment, then put his hand on the spot where he had placed the feather. Immediately, the eagle turned to face the sea once more. Gunnar felt the magical life flowing out of it, until at last the same bedraggled feather lay in his palm. He laughed, and the gulls hovering over the waves seemed to squawk with pleasure too. Gunnar sat on a chest in the middle of the ship. One of Wiglaf's men, a young red-haired Viking called Erland, worked nervously on the thrall ring with a file. Thorkel and Rorik stood looking on, arms folded. Wiglaf and the rest of the crew had retreated to the stern for the time being, and watched from there. "The join's broken," said Erland at last. He gripped the ring, getting his hands between it and Gunnar's neck, but he couldn't pull it open. "Here, let me," Rorik said. He took the ring in his hands and stretched it wide as if nothing could be easier. Then he handed it to Gunnar. "You are no longer a slave, Gunnar," he said. "I give you your freedom." Gunnar stared down at the twisted piece of metal. After a moment he raised his eyes to Rorik. "I owe you a silver arm ring for this, don't I?" "Not any more. You paid your debt when you saved my life." Gunnar rubbed his neck, then rose to his feet and went over to the gunwale. He remembered his months as a slave, all the curses and kicks, all the insults he had endured, and he threw the thrall ring as far as he could, watching it spin through the spray-filled air and plunge into the sea with a small splash. The ship skimmed across the waves towards Iceland and Valhalla.